Welcome to the insurance panel, Superyachts Investor 2025. And the panel for this year is very much going to be claims focused for a change. And so the title is that insurance doesn't matter until it does. So I'll be hosting your panel today, and in a sense sort of representing amongst the assembled team the independent sort of broking side. But just as kind of an intro, really, and for a bit of fun, but truth and false. But claims has always been considered the most sexy part of insurance. Possibly false. And in truth, the truth here is that, you know, most young people don't run towards the claims part of insurance when they think of a career in insurance. But in reality, it's probably the most important part. And for those of us that are involved in handling claims, it can be fascinating, supportive and collaborative, and very professionally rewarding. But importantly, it is, after all, the promise to pay and handle claims that we all as insurance buyers invest in. So if there's a view or a tip, it would be invest well. So we're going to do things a little bit differently this year, and we're going to take a brief look at some high-profile incidents, and then we're going to review a real claims journey. And after that, having only covered two subjects, unlike last year, we're going to give more time to some Q&A for the conference. So, if I may, please let me introduce you to your panel. We've got Paul Fuller, who's Director of Claims at Howden Sturge in the centre. Michelle van der Merwe, Super Yacht Lead at Pantaenius Monaco. Tom McCaughey in the lovely blue tie from Charles Taylor for loss adjusters. Adam Jackson, Director of Marine Engineering at ABL on the end. And Serena Witter, who's a trial lawyer for Robert Allen Law. So, rather cunningly, as you can see, what we've tried to achieve here is all of the stakeholders in each part of the insurance claims journey are represented here. And I hope that it's going to be of interest for you. So we'll move on through some slides and, if I can, here we go. Some high-profile incidents. So in 2024, there have been at least 12 yachts totally destroyed. However, on balance, the year hasn't been as bad as 2023 and 2022, when there were 20 and 22 losses, respectively. Excuse the language. That was the best bit. I think we get the gist. But from time to time, we see high-profile yacht claims that make us sit up and pay attention. And two of these are some of the more recent obvious ones, which is Ecstasy and Bayesian. And the latter, of course, is a stop in your tracks moment for the entire super yacht community and the world in many respects in terms of putting a focus on the super yacht space. If I could just say that in touching on Bayesian, it's important to be clear that Bayesian is an ongoing and live claim, and there are some panel participants that cannot comment on the subject. So we'll sort of navigate around those individuals. And that any brief conversations today that are in relation to that incident are very general, high level and respectful of the tragic loss that was involved. So it's not intended to sensationalise or speculate in any way, but it's a big thing that's happened, and it's the elephant in the room that you can't avoid, and I'm sure you would like to talk about that. So that opens us up to our sort of panel discussion on the high-profile incidents to begin with. And, you know, some of these big events sort of focus minds, and they raise some pretty large questions. I'm going to drop this on you first, Michelle, which is, you know, an obvious segue, which is the public relations aspect to events of this nature. Share with us, you know, some thoughts from a claims perspective.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously with the Bayesian, the social media, it was rife with, and I was asked for comment, and various people asked for comment. So it was quite hard to manage that. So I think obviously I spoke to our claims director just to get a view on Pantaenius's kind of crisis communication process. And there obviously there's some set rules for a big organisation like Pantaenius, so we would appoint a task force and have key members from each department, and then there would be one single message and all communication through that. I think with Bayesian, because of the high-profile nature of the owner and the people like the Daily Mail getting hold of it, it was just very hard to manage, I imagine. But in terms of the companies involved, then normally there would just be one team looking after that communication, obviously with marketing involved and making sure that the company give one message out there, you know, one press release and then maybe updates. But I'd imagine that in the case of Bayesian, it was extremely difficult to manage that.
Yeah, I think if you didn't turn to thinking about what a crisis plan might look like in the future after learning about the Bayesian, then you probably haven't thought things through fully. And PR was absolutely front and centre, wasn't it? And
yeah, I mean,
it continues to be.
In terms of not ongoing claims, but in terms of big claims like that, I mean, obviously companies afterwards can kind of, notwithstanding the terrible tragedy there, of using that as a positive, showing that claims processes, you know, the claims can go well, and they use it obviously for a marketing thing. I mean, I know with Pantaenius we had that huge storm in, this is for smaller boats, not super yachts, the huge storm in the Baltic. And from speaking to the claims director since then, they've now got a cumulative claims process in place where they've got everything in place ready if there was several yachts involved in a claim like the Hurricane or something. You know, making sure they've got Starlink subscription, they've got all dry foods, they've got a psychotherapist on hand, you know, everything. So that's quite interesting as well.
And everything being hyper-connected these days, and everything happening at light speed. So interesting. Just looking at the Bayesian situation briefly, for those that can, you know, from a loss-adjusting viewpoint, Tom, you know, like the rest of us, we sat up, flipped open the iPad or the laptop or whatever and saw it spring up on the news. What ran through your mind from a design stability? I guess there were a million questions in your head as a practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. Morning, everybody. Design stability. I mean, we're on the adjusting side, so our focus is usually in the event of the claim occurring, trying to investigate what's happened. And we just talked about PR and social media. That it's very difficult to manage that alongside an investigation that's ongoing and making sure you're getting all the information you can as early as possible. From a design perspective, you're looking at that and thinking, well, what's happened and how and why? But it's already happened at that point. The boat's underwater, of course. So I'm not privy to the case, and difficult to get the documentation that you would need. Owners may have a certain level of documentation, but you might also be interested in getting information from the builders. Not so easy when they're in a position where they might be looking to protect themselves. And of course, in any claim situation, design considerations come into play from a policy perspective. Often policies do not cover rectification of design errors, but they usually cover, for example, the damages that may arise from a fault arising from that design error. So tricky to get to a point where it's usually after an investigation has taken place that you're at a point where you can say, right, what learnings might we have from this? Which is frustrating because, of course, you would want that beforehand.
Definitely one of those events, isn't it? Whereas insurance professionals, I don't know about you guys, but I was getting phone calls from anything from friends, family friends, connections, or whatever. What's going on? Why has it happened? And so on. So you should know, and all the rest of it. But in reality, and I think I posted something about it at the time, which is it has to be allowed to take its course, and with the due respect, and we all want to get to the bottom of it so that there's learns, because we don't want that.
And hopefully that will come out at some point and be shared as part of the public domain, but then that may not be the case.
Yeah, exactly. One of those moments where super yacht world has been brought into global focus, but not for the right reasons, unfortunately. And there you go. So,
if I just could say that, I think it also highlights that, the importance of having a good kind of insurance team, a good broker or a good insurance provider to support you through that claims process, and also knowing what insurance cover you've got in place. Have you got enough protection for the guests? Have you got enough crew medical? Have you got we got a lot of questions after this particular incident asking what guest cover they had because they didn't know.
Yeah, dive in, Paul.
Thanks, Michelle. If I could just add to what Michelle was saying, and obviously the video of the ecstasy hitting the St. Martin Bridge is a good illustration. I mean, we talk about the insurance program. You're looking after the interests of the owner with their asset, but the insurance program is covering more than that. It's covering the yacht, it's covering the liability, so the damage to the bridge and injuries to guests, and obviously crew welfare. It's all part of the bigger picture. And as Michelle rightly says, there's a panel of experts who are there to support an owner and the owner's team, the managers and the captain in any given situation, of which the crisis management, dealing with the incident, be it the bridge or the Bayesian, including the PR, is all part of it. And there is a strength of the insurance and their experts to work with the owner's team in dealing with the media, because obviously the Bayesian was such a high-profile case. It was in the news incredibly because of the incredible circumstances of it. But these losses do happen, not to that severity, but the point being is that the insurance is there to work with the owner's team in dealing with the crisis.
And when you're looking at something like the very unfortunate bridge in St. Martin, which I believe that's not the first time it's been hit. Yeah, exactly. I mean, from a surveyor's viewpoint, Adam, what goes through your mind when you're looking at that, unpicking it,
I think, good morning, everyone. I think initially what I was thinking when I was seeing that video was paint damage straight away. And as most of us in this room know, that when it comes to the differences between superyacht insurance and superyacht claims and merchant shipping claims, things like paint, have a huge impact, and there's huge costs involved. And as a surveyor, our assessment of the paint damage is in an incident like that will be one of the most important factors. And just to sort of reiterate what Paul was saying there, when an incident occurs, before the point where we are assessing damage and getting into what we do as our sort of core focus as a surveyor on board, we're also there with that team that has been set up to manage that initial response, whether that might be with regards to salvage or to assist with crew, because often we'll be the people on the ground to assist the captain and the owner and the management company with that. So.
Yeah. So some of your surveyors are dusting down their sort of buildings expertise, are they, for a joint inspection of the poor forlorn
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
pilot house? Yeah, I think they got a bit upset, the islanders, didn't they, to see their new shiny building destroyed again. Segues sort of nicely in both sort of situations for Serena, which is ultimately the responsibility borne by a captain.
Hello, everyone. Absolutely. So the captains are the best line of defense in any good insurance program, in any risk mitigation program. The buck ultimately stops with the captain. And hopefully there's no captains in the room so I can speak candidly. But, okay, I'll behave myself. I'll be more diplomatic in my response. So for obviously with the first issue that we saw in terms of, look, insurance is there when there's a true accident, right? It's like a car accident. If there's operational error, operational negligence, that is what insurance is for. And so what usually happens with some of these captains is they don't always admit that it was operational negligence. And that can create sometimes some complexity in the cause and origin investigation. Obviously, for obvious reasons, they might be nervous about, oh my gosh, I just created this huge liability, and now people are asking, now I'm in an interview with the insurance company, and they're concerned about their jobs, they're concerned about, what's gonna happen kind of to their record in terms of creating this liability. And sometimes there might be an instinct to blame something that went wrong with the vessel rather than fessing up. And so that's where sometimes I come in to represent the owner and just to help along with the claims process to figure out the true issue. Because sometimes when things might go a little bit off track in terms of just trying to understand the cause and origin of this accident, the captain, by trying to save himself or herself, might be putting coverage at risk if there's an issue with a component, if there might be an issue with maintenance, something, again, that might trigger an exclusion in the policy. And so sometimes I step in to just make sure that the truth comes out, but that ultimately there is coverage for this incident. And another aspect I think is important to note is just making sure you understand in your policy what the requirements are for the captain, and making sure that the training, the skills and qualifications are being met with that captain, or whether the policy actually requires that the captain be named in the policy. Especially if there's been a change in the captain, making sure that the insurance company knows about it so that there's no surprises after the event.
Yeah, I think thank you. I think there's two sides to this, which is a high-profile event such as this has brought back into focus the real responsibility of a captain. And rather than seeing that entirely as a negative sort of situation, it kind of drags the focus back onto your recruitment program to making sure that you've really got your checks and balances in place. I think there was a case that Hill Dickinson looked at probably about a year ago now, where a lot of the KYC information that's being asked, as we should, around ultimate beneficial owners and whether they've had previous criminal records and so on and so forth, we now integrate those questions into extending that to the captain as well. Because actually, for too long, I think that's just been overlooked. So, and to be fair to captains everywhere, hopefully this is an opportunity for them to be seen in a raised profile light, that I have a serious job here. I have a serious role, the buck stops with me, and if we empower them more, they might be a bit more forthcoming when, unfortunately, they make mistakes. So that's brilliant, panel. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next part, which is claims journey. So we're actually going to look at a claim which is a real claim study of a total loss that occurred just under a year ago. It's all going to be on an anonymised basis with the kind permission of all the stakeholders that were involved. So once I've set the scene, we can look to our panelists for a short outline of how they would respond to these circumstances. And at the end, I'll summarise and share the actual outcomes and some of the challenges that were experienced in this claim. In this instance, this was a new vessel, and it was fitted with lithium house battery power systems. So, not going to bore you to death with things about toys. This is the real big slabby lithium batteries. So let's hope this works. Short video. Said it was short. But actually, to capture, that was literally the crew having stepped off the boat and onto their tender. To have captured that, when I first saw it, I thought this has to be shared for, professional educational purposes if we can. So moving on to what it is they left. So the lithium banks in this particular vessel were under the main saloon area. And if you can imagine, they're sort of horizontal in shape and like large crash mats. And once the lithium fire took hold, there was no stopping it. There we go. So that's where we got to before she sank. So that was the last thing that we saw of this particular vessel. So turning to everybody in the claims jigsaw here, the first thing that happens in this kind of situation, Paul, you've just received the first notification of loss.
Thanks, Mike. So I think really in terms of super yachts and luxury yachts that we deal with as brokers, we place the insurances on behalf of the owners of those yachts, work very closely with the owners' representatives, invariably with the yacht management team. So in terms of the first notification, often that may come directly from the captain. More often than not, it will come via the DPA, or the yacht management company, and depends how, in my experience, in very severe cases, time is of the essence. You're given very little time to actually get the basic details so that you can trigger and activate insurance response. So you're trying to get the position, you're trying to understand what the current status is of the yacht. Has there been any accidents or injuries to guests and crew? Is there pollution and environmental damage? If you're given the opportunity to speak to the captain or the owner's representative, DPA, you can quickly ask those questions and obviously coordinate with them so that you've got enough information to try and identify the relevant insurances that are going to be responding to that loss. So in the scenario we have here, clearly, we've got a yacht on fire. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously we're going to go and contact the hull and machinery insurer, but we're going to put the P&I insurer on notice. We're going to be talking to the yacht managers as to whether or not there's any injuries to the guests and crew, and therefore there's a whole program of insurance that will respond. But in my experience in that situation, we're waiting for information flow to come back. The crew are evacuating the yacht. You may get an initial call. It may be immediately whilst they're still on board. It may be shortly thereafter. It's a matter of timing, but the point will be at that point, we can activate. My next port of call will be to contact the insurers because they have a whole wealth of experts, be it surveyors, Adam mentioned salvage and things like that he can talk in more detail about, whereby they can deploy to have a whole wealth of expertise available to the owners team to support them in any given emergency.
So cunningly, to your left is an insurer. You're the next stage in the game now. The first notifications come in. You're beginning a conversation internally, I think.
Yeah, the first thing that we would do if we get the notification, we do direct business or business via brokers. So depending where it comes from, the first thing we would do is obviously appoint a surveyor. And if it was in the case of a fire, there would be a fire expert appointed as well. We would then be speaking to the lead insurer on the consortium, Hull and P&I, and often the P&I will then appoint a correspondent as well, and maybe their own surveyor, depending on what the situation is. So yeah, it's just to start the process. The first thing we'd do is get a surveyor on site ASAP, especially if there is any kind of pollution risk or anything. Try and mitigate things immediately. We had a big grounding where it was a sailing yacht on a sandbank, and there was a second storm forecast. So the first thing we had to get someone out there immediately to try and get this boat off the sandbank before the second storm hit, because it would have just caused even more damage. So yeah, so it's about speed, and then obviously gathering the facts afterwards.
And from the insurer's perspective as well, because they're very numbers driven, and they have a responsibility to their shareholders and their investors, suddenly they're trying to put a figure on it immediately. Yeah. It's kind of, okay, what's the reserve going to be?
Yeah,
because is this a really large loss, or is this one, characterize it, and then we know what's going on in it.
Yeah, I mean, on the hull insurance side, they're focusing on the reserve straight away, whereas the P&I side is more about the people and the pollution and the actual liabilities. But the hull, yeah, they'll be looking at the setting reserve very quickly.
Yeah. I think, Becky, if I can just add to that, and given the scenario you have there, the reality is you can't deploy a surveyor immediately. So what will happen is the insurance market that are dealing with superyachts, Pantaenius and everybody included, basically will have a crisis management response where they will be working with experts who will be appointed, and the first point of call is they will be put in contact with the owner's representative, the technical managers, the people who are coordinating the emergency, the crisis, and they will deal with it remotely. Now, if it's an asset where there's a fire or a collision and the boat then arrives in port, then a surveyor will deploy. But reputable insurers who know their game will employ experts who will liaise with the owner's team in coordinating the emergency, making sure everything's taken care of whilst they are investigating it, and will attend at the earliest opportunity thereafter.
Yeah, very good point, Paul. But Adam, assuming that the cavalry hasn't quite arrived, or it has, but the point is we've now looked at a surveyor appointment. It's coming out of your camp. What's happening? You're thinking of doing what next?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily on this one, which was probably fairly clear what was going on, but usually, yeah, we would be appointed, instructed, and given contact details for the vessel, whether that be technical manager or captain, and we might get involved early on with that sort of mitigation of any further loss. So we might look at, if they've had some engine damage or something like that, we might get involved there to try and advise them and help them to limit that any further damage that might happen. And then we would talking to the person on board, to the captain or to the technical manager, we would decide with them when is the best time for one of our surveyors to be on board, to be there. And sometimes it's immediately, sometimes it's get somebody out there straight away, and sometimes the captain has other things to deal with, and they need to they may be dealing with crew issues or something, and so it might be better for us to wait a few days before we grab our bag and off we go. But yeah, at that stage we would get ourselves out on board as quickly as possible, and as what we talked about earlier. One of our first jobs is to try and get the crew and the captain to feel at ease with us as surveyors on board. We're not there to try and find fault. We're not there to try and find blame. We're not looking to catch anybody out. So, and we do get that quite a lot with when we're speaking to the captain and the crew on board. They do clam up and they're so worried about saying something that's gonna cause trouble for them or. And that's not what we're there for. We're there to look at reducing any further damage. We're looking at the extent of the damage. We're looking to get a good estimation early on the potential cost, and how long it might take to carry out any repairs. But we're not there to try and find blame. We're looking at cause. Obviously, we are looking at cause, and that is important for future for subrogation and such like. But us as surveyors on board, we're not really interested in that. We're just
and the crew, and the captain, all being well, nobody's injured or hurt, but they can be quite shell-shocked for a variety of reasons, not least because physically they've just stepped off a boat that's on fire. But everything comes down upon their shoulders: the responsibility to their owners, the shame that they've somehow not managed to control the situation. Everything is in the game. But also, they are being bombarded from different directions. They've possibly got a P&I correspondent that wants to talk to them. They've got the surveyor for insurance that wants to talk to them. The captain of port wants to talk to them. The prefecture have just jumped on board, because ultimately it's happened in a nature reserve. Yeah, great. So there's a lot going on, isn't there? So, and just anecdotally, on this particular claim, there was a fire forensic headed down to the vessel, and he was actually on the plane when the vessel sank. So essentially, he got back off the plane and back through customs and went home again because, no longer required at this point in time. So that's how it can go. So pushing it slightly further forward, Tom, and I know that Charles Taylor also do surveying as well as loss adjusting. So, but I'm asking you to sort of chime in on your sort of loss adjusting hat here is we've done the survey, the surveyors have begun to do their work. You're now beginning to build a loss adjusting picture. And who you're working with and how does that work?
Sure. So we're an external service provider primarily working for insurance companies. So in cases like Michelle was saying, you get your crisis management or your crisis team together, would usually form part of that team, and we'd be working often from day one very closely with the likes of Adam and the surveyors and communicating constantly really with the brokers and feeding that back up and down the chain so that everybody has an understanding of the sort of timeline so that we can pass it. That's a very important element of how long do we think this is going to take? Can we have a sensible conversation up the chain to the owner, to the insured, and what are their expectations coming back down the chain to us? How quickly can we move this forward? We also might look at it and make recommendations on, for example, a forensic investigator. There's nothing to see at this point, but at some point there will be. The boat's underwater. When we move to wreck removal, which in this scenario is fairly obvious it's a wreck rather than something that's salvageable, at what point does that move across to the forensics? You might say, well, you wait for it to come out of the water and be lifted ashore so that an investigation can take place. But what about disturbance of evidence during the lifting process? Is there any advice that we can get from an expert thinking ahead? What are they going to be looking at and what's important? Because if that evidence is disturbed, also having been underwater for the amount of time that it might take to get it up again, what's going to make the difference to their conclusions, to their investigation? Is that evidence going to be disturbed? And is there anything we can do to prevent that? But yeah, we would be reviewing the policy as early as, from day one, make sure we have a good solid understanding of the coverage points, any elements of the investigation from the surveyor side that we might be keen on when the boat does get lifted. I might be asking Adam to ask certain questions of the crew to hone in on some of those coverage points as early as possible. We want to get certainty for the owners. We don't want to be in a position where we're turning around and saying, well, we still need more information 3 months down the line. We want to get as much as we can as early as possible so that we can make a recommendation to insurers to either pay the claim or, unfortunately in some cases, not.
And at this point, or not necessarily exactly at this point, but in the mix here also is going to be an independent broker who recognises that the loss adjuster is independently but working for insurers to make an assessment and recommendation of the claim. So an insurance broker, if there's one in the mix, is now leaning into this process and engaging with the loss adjusters to ensure that their agency, which is on behalf of the owners, is to maximise points of coverage with any Q&A and fact-finding and otherwise. And concurrent to all of this, we come to our friends in the legal world, which kind of has two things going on, doesn't it, really?
Sure. A few things are going on here. If it goes down to timeline and if everybody is working as they should be and everybody is very conscious as to moving things along, then there's no need for me. But if I'm getting a call, usually it's because something is gumming up the works, something is being held up, the timeline is taking longer than usual, or at least the expectations of the owner, and so I get a call to just jump in there and figure out what's going wrong and try to fix it. So when I get a call like that, I try to establish a relationship with all of the actors and making sure I'm establishing a good relationship. But as a litigator, unfortunately, I kind of start to get my spidey senses and figure out what's going on here. Sometimes when something is getting gummed up in the process with the claims process, I'm anticipating maybe there might be an issue with coverage. And so I start to look into that a little bit. And in the US, although we borrow a lot of our law from English law, there's a doctrine called uber me fide. And for all of you that are not up to terms on your Latin, that means the duty of utmost good faith. And that is in regards to making sure that the contracting parties are being as transparent as possible and disclosing all of the material facts during the underwriting process. And although it's the duty on both sides, a lot of times it's used by the insurance company to make sure that there are no, and what I mean no, issues during the application process. If there are any material facts that have been misrepresented or by omission, that can be a means to not only exclude coverage, but to terminate the entire policy and act as if the policy never existed in the first place. You'll get a refund check for your premium, and there will be no coverage. And so I'm looking to see if, for instance, in this instance, if there has been anything in the application or underwriting process that talks about having lithium batteries on board. And sometimes when I'm starting to ask about that application process, I'm talking to the brokers, I'm talking to the captain, I'm talking to the owner, who was kind of in charge of making these disclosures. A lot of times I kind of get a blank stare, like, I don't know. Who knows? Who was in charge of that? And so I need to start to track that down and see what I can get from the insurance side to just see, is there a problem here? And let's try to get ahead of that. So that's kind of on the owner side. If I were to put my hat on the other side, for example, if I were counsel for the P&I, right? We're looking into liability issues with crew members. There doesn't seem to be a crash here, but if there was another vessel involved, I want to make sure that things are moving along, because at that point there becomes a race to the courthouse situation in terms of another boat's been hit, there's been personal injury. Sometimes those lawyers get straight away to the courthouse, and I want to try to prevent that and make sure that they understand the claims process is here, we're not going anywhere, and please let's try to work this out. So I'm trying to mitigate that risk in terms of adding more fees. We tend to charge a lot as attorneys, and if there's a way to lower that, I'm going to try to get ahead of that.
Thank you. And an important point that you made there, for anybody who gets involved in the discovery process of the client journey and fact-finding, is it is such an important document to get right. So if it feels painful when your broker of choice or your insurer of choice is going through this information with you, please bear with them, because it's the first document that comes out of the drawer when the loss has happened. And if you can't turn back to it, as we did in fact in this case, which demonstrated that it was a complete declaration of retrospectively fitted lithium house batteries, huge sigh of relief for all concerned, it is really important. So, conscious of time and wanting to get on to Q&A, just to wrap up this, and thank you panel, just to wrap up this, some challenges that have definitely occurred with this claim was tide and wave height, because the vessel eventually sank in only 20 metres of water, and everybody would think, okay, that's fine, you can lift that up, no problem at all. There was no supporting tidal vectors or wave height or wind conditions for nearly two and a half months. So ultimately, when they did eventually get to doing it safely, it disintegrated on the way up. So ultimately, that vessel never saw the light of day again. Now, what challenges did that bring? Inability to understand the exact cause. That feeds into subrogation issues, which is the insurer doesn't necessarily have a clean line of attack to try and recover some of their costs. Retrofitted, which means that there was a third-party contractor that fitted it after the original build, so their liability was limited to their contract value, not the value of the vessel. So take caution when you're looking at all of these owners, particularly on the smaller yachts, who think it's a rinky-dink idea to upgrade to lithium batteries, God knows why, because gel batteries work really well, then just take care with that. And it just some final sort of questions that it, I think, raises is we use, for those of us who are old, used to have something called a halon system on powerboats long before we got into the super yacht world, which means that you'd pull a trigger and you'd kill an engine fire, but probably somebody else if they were in the compartment, which is why it got binned off eventually. But in truth, We've got BMS monitoring systems going on with lithium house batteries. You'd like to think there'd be some training involved. You'd like to think that they're auto switches so that they cease to provide charge when there's a problem. You'd really like to think that somebody might have some fire suppression. But it is shocking the amount of builders of particularly the smaller to medium-sized yachts that you introduce to a lithium-ion fire extinguisher for the first time. Okay, I think there's a real call for a lithium-ion system to be developed, even if it just allows you to get people off the boat. And I think that's missing. And I think there's a wider discussion that we can have in the bazaars around where classification comes in. I think that bar needs to be lowered into some of the smaller production yachts. But we're running out of time. So I'm going to go straight to Q&A if that's okay. So questions for the panel. The top one is apparently the one that you've most demanded. So there are many stakeholders, flag class insurance lawyers, port authority, captain, management owners. Who holds the ultimate authority to sort an incident? Mr. Fuller, I think this is one for you.
Well, essentially, it's the insured's claim. And what I mean by the insured, it's the insured owner of the yacht and their team, be it the captain, the managers. So if you take this sort of situation, invariably, the managers and captains will coordinate with flag, with class. We, as the insurance broker, are there to represent their interest in dealing with the insurers, liaising with the average adjuster and with the surveyor and with the insurer. I think the message I would like to give listening to this panel is that actually we are there to pay claims, and hopefully the message you've seen from this claims journey, there is a whole load of experts, not only to investigate the circumstances of the loss, but if it's a valid claim, to pay that claim. Because we're not just talking about a total loss situation where sadly the yacht is sunk. Majority of the claims that we deal with, and Adam referenced paint damage, are partial loss situations. We deal with the bread and butter of losses every day where yachts have machinery damage or breakdown. There's a great many stakeholders involved in the process, and if it runs smoothly, there is a team working there, both insurers and the owner's team working together to get the right result and the outcome, which is to restore the asset, the yacht, to its pre-accident condition so the owner can go off and enjoy yachting. And that's what we're all essentially here to achieve. So yeah, we will all work together with the stakeholders.
And actually, the people that are on the scene at the time, acting as prudent uninsured in their best endeavours to mitigate a loss, which is one of their duties under a claim. So you can't run away from the fact that the very people that are in the vessel whose engines have failed and are causing problems and otherwise, you get a grip of it, guys. And we're there to support you and unpick things afterwards, but ultimately, and bring to bear support. But you're the guys on the tiller. So that's the... Okay, so let's go to the next question, if we can. Thoughts on yacht managers, brokers making introductory commissions for introducing insurance brokers, or indeed actually being insurance brokers themselves? God, I wish I was on the panel for this one. Michelle, I think that's probably one for you, isn't it? Because you've got lots of these.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my thoughts about insurance brokers and yacht managers and things, but I mean, I guess I think my main point would be that you need to make sure you've got the right expert for the right job. So if you have a qualified insurance broker in-house in a yacht management company, then fair enough, but as long as they are an expert and they can make sure that they're acting in the owner's best interest there's no conflict across the kind of different big brokerage houses. But making introductory commissions for introducing insurance brokers, I'm not sure that, I guess it's still happening, but there are some introducer fees, you can call it. So you make an introductory fee, which I think as long as it's declared to all parties, then that's fine. In terms of running commission, then I think that probably a lot of them are not taking that anyway. But I think it's important that it's very transparent and everyone knows that as long as it's documented and that it's transparent, then and also it's within the regulatory framework of that particular country, then it's fine.
Perfect answer. Absolutely. No, I agree with that. So fire on to the next question. What percentage of claims are paid out to the client across your businesses? You're never going to get that answer out of an insurer. It's commercially sensitive information, but I mean, you know, we've got one insurer sort of on the panel here, but it's...
I actually don't know that.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll have to come back to you on that.
All I would just add to that is because I've studied it and shared on a previous sort of presentation, is the pie that makes up the premium is divided into expenses, commissions to insurance broker, loss adjusting expenses, and you hope to get some profit. Most insurers will run at somewhere between 90 and 110% as a loss ratio. So if they're running at anything north of 100, in that particular underwriting year, they've not made any money. Okay, so they're all trying to keep sub 100. And generally speaking, yes, they make money in large volume, but they don't, it's not a colossal amount of money, it's cumulative. That'd be my take. Why don't insurance companies scrutinise the suitability, capability of captains who are employed on the yachts they insure? Who wants to take this one? Adam?
I mean, I don't necessarily think that the responsibility sits there with the insurance companies in that regard.
Who does it sit with?
Well, obviously in my previous role, Flag plays a strong part in that. We talked earlier, it was mentioned earlier about private and commercial yachts and the difference there. So you have issues there. Where Flag or Class or where Flag are not particularly involved or interested, it comes back on the owner to ensure that whoever's looking after their vessel is properly qualified, and you know, the responsibility does sit with the owner. I think that is lost a lot with the certainly with the smaller private vessels.
Yeah, but in terms of answering the question, we do. I mean, we are checking the suitability and capability of captains. I know all of us do CVs, making sure they've got the right qualifications. In terms of their kind of suitability, though, that would be down to the owners. But we are doing our checks before and improving or not approving.
And to be fair for captains, usually that's going to be fine on the front end, and usually suitability is not really questioned until after there's an incident, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, who approved this captain, right? After the fact. So I think it's hindsight is always 20/20, right? And when we have these accidents, it's important to create a safe space for crew and captain to admit error and a mistake, but without needing to attack their suitability and their qualifications.
Tom?
I would just add that all of our insurer clients do scrutinise both the suitability and capability. It was touched on earlier, I think, about the change in captain. If there's a material change in circumstances, this would be a really key one that is on occasion not declared to insurers, and then an incident happens, and then owners find themselves in a really tricky position in that scenario. If as long as underwriters are maintaining the consistency, though, of their reviews, then they might be able to turn around and retrospectively say, okay, yes, an incident has just happened and we're only looking at this now, but this is what we would have done, and we can justify that based on previous examples, previous CVs we've looked at. And if they feel that the new captain wasn't as suitable, then maybe they wouldn't have approved it, then yeah, we've had to recommend to some of our clients that they decline a claim, unfortunately, which could have been avoided if owners had told their broker and it had been passed up the chain. And then, you know, it's noted on the policy that there's been a change.
And I would just add to that, from an independent broker's viewpoint, if your independent broker or chosen source of insurance is doing their job properly, they should be supporting the owners, knowing that what they're putting forward as a captain to be approved, they know they're going to be approved by Flag, because they've scrutinised it on behalf of the client, working in partnership with them. And sometimes it's necessary to push back gently to the client and just test if there's any more information that is going to help justify the sort of approval that you're going to get. So it's collaboration between all the stakeholders. I think we've run out of time, but thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much to the panel.